All right. Hey, everybody. It's Eric alongside Rod here to talk a little USC basketball with Marc Kulkin, who hosts the Locked On USC podcast, Your Best Abilities Accountability. He also writes for weareusc.com, and his X handle is Marc Kulkin, at Marc Kulkin. Marc, thanks so much for coming on. The Final Four is on the schedule. Did you hear me?
I got you right when you started into the locked on part, and then it just went.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we are using a new format here. We're trying StreamYard instead of Zoom. So, anyway, thanks. This Marc Kulkin from Locked On Podcast, and he is with the USC. He's also what is the name of this show's ability is not accountability.
Yeah, so the show is called Locked On USC, part of a Locked On network. The best part, when I say the best part of accountability, that's just a kind of a motto type of thing. That's just who I am.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure because if so, then your show name is actually as long as ours, which is nice.
Oh no, not quite.
Thanks for joining the Final Fours on the schedule. I appreciate you coming by.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And you can find Marc at Marc Kulkin on X. Before we begin, I just want to make two corrections to last week's show. We've been going over the roster. There's a new addition to Michigan State, Shimon Zapala. And I was so worried about getting his first name wrong that I totally botched his last name. So it's Zapala. I apologize. I'm turning more into my dad, where he gets every name wrong, and I'm not quite sure how this happened. You just turn into your parents, just like that commercial, and I think that's happened to me now.
That's like me and the Polynesian names. It is a tongue twister, no matter what.
Yeah, we're just starting to get them. They're starting to dribble into the Midwest, but I suppose, yeah, you definitely have a lot more exposure out there in Southern California. The other correction is that I said he played for Longwood University, which was in California. It is not in California. It is in Virginia. And so I'm probably thinking Long Beach State or something like that. So anyway, with that all out of the way, Marc, thanks again for coming on the show. We want to talk a little USC. The first question is sort of the obvious one. We've been going up and down the West Coast. And so what is your feel and what is the fan base for USC's feel for leaving the Pac-10, 12, and now joining the Big 10, 14, 18, whatever it is now?
Yeah, so I like to call it the big conference. That way, I think it covers everything. I'll tell you what, it's been a long time coming. Not so much USC coming to the big conference, USC not being affiliated with the Pac-10, Pac-12, Pac-8 conference. It's just been a giant yoke around their neck. USC going to the big conference from a perspective is better exposure, more marquee type of games, matchups. When you're, USC, it was always, we're talking about basketball. It's USC versus UCLA. You have your conference rivalries, USC versus Stanford, USC versus Cal. But other than that, basketball just USC is a football school, always will be first. However, I think joining the big conference can maybe balance the scales a little bit more. And I've been trying to tell the USC fan base that they better be ready, otherwise they're going to be embarrassed, because there's a different level of appreciation for college basketball in the big conference than there is within the USC fan base. You get UCLA basketball, USC football, and then whatever is the team of the day in the Pac-12 conference is when the Pac-12 kind of gets all the shine from the national spotlight.
Right. Because our impression is that there are just a couple teams that take basketball seriously in the Pac-12, and then there was kind of everybody else. It's sort of like UCLA and Arizona, and maybe Oregon cycles up, or Washington, or Utah. Utah had a pretty good program before they joined the Pac-12, but outside of that, everyone else kind of was an afterthought. Maybe that's not accurate.
No, like I said, you're saying exactly what I'm trying to say. You have UCLA basketball. Arizona is obviously a basketball school. Oregon seems to be, the flash in the pan, just because of the whole Phil Knight, the Nike thing. So yeah, I get it. But yeah, to your point, there's really no, I guess, top tier thing where everything. Hey, let's go watch Pac-12 basketball. If Arizona's playing Duke or playing Michigan State, sure, that's going to get a lot of eyeballs. But USC versus Arizona, it's not going to resonate nationally.
And then when you're talking about USC and the conference, I mean, you made it sound like it's no big deal, and that actually the conference, the Pac-12, has been, as you mentioned, a rope around USC. Is that just because the brand is so big that you think they would have been better off not even being part of a conference like the Pac-12, or what do you mean by that?
It was just from an administrative level managed horribly. Like I said, I one of the things I talk about was better exposure, more marquee games. The Pac-12 is just mismanaged from their TV contract aspect of it. You have the Big Ten ACC challenge, those types of things. You didn't have that with the Pac-12, where it kind of elevated the basketball programs. So I'm always looking at it more from a macro type of thing. Again, because football carries everything, basketball as well, including the Big Ten conference. So without getting that type of assistance from the conference level, I think it's always been more of a challenge for USC basketball to kind of elevate itself.
Yeah, and I guess following up on that, and you've already touched on this to some extent, but I wanted to delve a little deeper into where basketball sits within the firmament of the athletic program as a whole. Now, I'm not quite old enough to remember the Paul Westphal era, but I certainly do remember when the first Baby Jordan, Harold Miner was there, and there was a brief, I think Henry Bibby was the coach during that period, which must have been interesting given that he was a UCLA guy. And obviously there have been points. There was the Tim Floyd era, which had some success. You've had some level of success under the just departed Andy Ensfield, but I just wanted a little more in-depth picture of where basketball sits. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that you believe there's a lot of untapped potential that perhaps this move is going to help USC start to fulfill.
Absolutely. It took USC forever to get the Galen Center built. And it came on the heels of Carson Palmer winning the Heisman Trophy Award. True story. One of USC's big boosters said, you know what? Carson won the Heisman. I want to donate money. Let's get the basketball program going now. And that's what got to go.
We have a football building named after Tom Izzo. So
cross-pollination, yeah.
My point, football carries everything. So USC basketball throughout the years has had the opportunity to be that sleeping giant. It still is a sleeping giant. You mentioned the Paul Westphal years. I'm not quite old enough to be able to watch those games live, but I know enough about him. Back then, UCLA was dominating the college basketball landscape. They were going to the Final Four every year. Back then, you can only have your conference champion go to the tournament. It was 32 teams.
Right.
USC was the number 2 team in the country. 2 losses on their resume. And guess who's sitting at home?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I don't think USC, their fans, the administration was like, you know what? If the NCAA is not going to take this serious, why should we? Let's just make sure we're focused on football. And so it's always been that kind of that slow drive up the mountain. You mentioned Baby Jordan, Harold Miner. There's been talent that has come through USC.
Sure.
And so now you have the Galen Center. You've had some really good talent coming through in the last 10 years or so, especially during the Enfield era. So we'll see what happens now that they're going to the Big Ten Conference. Some of my favorite years were those Tim Floyd years. And, he kind of got thrown under the bus again, tied in with the whole football Reggie Bush scandal. Mike Garrett said, you know what, let's throw the NCAA a bone. We'll say basketball was doing this. Turns out basketball wasn't doing any of that. And, Tim Floyd had his final day when he had his say in the newspapers. Anyways, USC made it to the Elite Eight, and they dominated Kentucky to get there. They met up Duke in the Elite Eight, and all of a sudden, it looks like USC is going to get to the Final Four for the first time since 1954, and Duke is Duke, and they said, some calls, and all of a sudden, USC's Elite Eight run ended right there. But yeah, there has been opportunities, and they just can't get over the hump, especially in the Andy Enfield era.
Was that Elite Eight year with Floyd? Was that the 2010 season? Because Michigan State played USC under Floyd in 2009, the year that we went to the national championship game and got blasted by Carolina. But I would argue that prior to the Carolina game, the second round game against USC was Michigan State's toughest game in that run. They had a very good team. Taj Gibson, I think, was on that team. Maybe was DeRozan on that team maybe as well? I can't recall if he's that old.
Yeah, don't make my brain work that hard.
Okay, but it was a very good team that played, and Michigan State was outstanding that year. Obviously, they got to the title game, but that USC game in the second round, I think it was one of the all-time underseeded teams versus what the number was versus what I saw on the court. It was ridiculous, the dichotomy between those two things, and they almost got us.
The game that stood out to me when USC played Michigan State was when Henry Bibby was the head coach, and Desmond Farmer was on that squad.
Oh, from Flint, sure.
Yes, and I don't know if you remember, Desmond never got in that game, and that I think caused some friction. Henry Bibby was a hard ass, and while I appreciate that type of coaching, I don't think he made the right move, keeping Desmond on the bench.
Yeah,
when playing at home, essentially playing at home,
sure,
against Michigan State. So
yeah,
who knows what would happen in that game had he played?
Right.
So I guess now we're looking at a coaching change here at USC. Rod just alluded to the fact that Andy Enfield has left USC. So I guess give us a feel for what went down. I mean, why did Enfield leave? Was he on the hot seat? I mean, was he perceived that he's going to get run out of town if he didn't do something? Because it seems like USC's been having some success recently.
Yeah. So the seat was warm. I don't think there was any, truth that, if you don't win, you're out of here type of thing. There wasn't any of that talk going on in the background. Now, with that said, there's a new athletic director as well, Jen Cohen, who took over for Mike Bone. And, we've talked about Andy Enfield has been bringing in a lot of talent, guys who've been drafted highly. And other than the run that they made in the tournament during the COVID year, again, another obstacle in USC basketball. I think he might have run his course. He had been there for 10 years. And I think maybe the messaging, what was happening in the locker room, wasn't working anymore. And I'm not sure Coach Enfield and NIL and the transfer portal in LA were working well together. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not blaming Coach Enfield for any of this. I'm just saying the perfect storm might have finally come together. New athletic director, not meeting expectations, having the right personnel, even having some NIL support. And then this past season, perfect example, they were picked to be at the top of the conference to challenge with Arizona, and they ended up at the bottom of the conference. So something didn't work out, and I think it was just time and I think Andy recognized, you know what? Let's not push anymore. I helped elevate the program. Let me get out now, and everybody can start fresh.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to interrupt real briefly, Rod, just before we're talking about things not working out. If your gutters aren't working out, make sure you check out the brothers at Just You Gutters. They are located in West Michigan and the east side of the state. They can take care of anything, whether you need replaced or repaired. Whatever you have problems with. Like I have problems with my front door. I had problems with a tree growing in my gutter. Problems that Mark here does not have out in Southern California because it only rains when it's scheduled, I think, by California, right? It's always 70 degrees and beautiful. So anyway, go ahead, Rod.
So obviously we just talked about the previous regime ending, and you brought in at USC Eric Musselman, who is a personality to
optional.
say the least. Right. Shirts optional. I'm curious how that has gone down with the fan base. If there's, we keep talking about this sleeping giant concept. Right. Is there a sense that this is the guy in combination with the move to the Big Ten that that could serve to really elevate the program? Do you think he's going to work? His act is going to play in Los Angeles?
Great question. He hasn't stayed very long wherever he goes.
Right.
Now, with that said, he is from Southern California. So
Yeah.
maybe this could end up being his dream job, so to speak. Wherever he's been, though, he's been successful. There's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And look, there's a lot of newness going on. USC's moving to the new conference. You bring in Eric Musselman. He's very energetic. It appears that he's putting together a good, I'll call it transfer portal class, because he hasn't had a chance to recruit.
Yeah.
And we're going to see what he can cobble together. You got to like what he's been able to do at his last stop at Arkansas. He's proven he can do it at, the Power 5 level conference. Well, now the Power 4 level conference. So we'll see if he can do that in LA. I'm looking forward to it. I've liked what he's said so far. But again, we've had so little contact with the basketball program media-wise. I haven't talked to any of the players, haven't met any of them. Coach Musselman's done, his introductory press conference. He's done a couple of other shows, but other than that, it's just trying to get the program built right now. Just the other day, he had 3 more staff members. Quincy Pondexter was one of them from the University of Washington.
Right.
Player there. So again, still trying to, patch up all the holes, get that spackle in there, paint the walls, and then hopefully have something presentable by the time they're ready for practice.
Do you have a sense as to why he opted to leave the Arkansas job and come to USC? Because normally you would see these, if you saw a Big 12 coach or an ACC coach or a Big East coach even moving to a Big 10 program, you could say, well, maybe there's a money difference because the conference football money is driving more money in the athletic department, et cetera. But, going SEC Big 10 is kind of a parallel move, at least in that regard. Did you get a sense as to what was driving it? Was it the lure going home, or do you think it was something else?
Yeah, I think it was the opportunity to come back to Southern California. When you get the chance, look, USC might not be UCLA basketball, but USC is still a pretty well-known brand across the country.
Yeah.
And look, when opportunity knocks and you want to stay at the highest level, it's not Kentucky, it's not, you're still at a pretty high level. Let's go back home. Let's take that opportunity. Right. And the money, I don't know. The cost of living in Southern California is a lot higher than it is.
Sure is.
That it is in Arkansas.
Fayetteville, yeah.
So we'll see how it works out. Again, he hasn't. I guess the knock on Coach Musselman is when he gets there, you'll get results. Will he stay there long enough, though, to kind of enjoy everything, the fruits of his labor?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting too to see how he opts to run the program, because not only in Arkansas, but even before that, Nevada, which was pre-portal, he still was very transfer heavy on his better teams, at least when he had, I think it was the Martin twins a few years ago. Right. So I'm curious if he's, we've seen some coaches in the Big Ten, for example, Dusty May just took the Michigan job, and he's got 27 transfers on the roster, twice as many as the allotted scholarship slots. But he has no choice. And he said publicly, I want this to be a developmental program. He wants to build with high school guys. I guess it's a curious thing. And have you gotten any sense from what Musselman said thus far? If he's indicated, does he really want to emphasize trying to tap into all that high school talent that exists in Southern California, for example?
I think he wants to. I mean, that's the, obviously the primary goal is to build, to build your foundation from the high school level. But basketball is a pretty unique sport. I mean, you don't need to have that many guys recruited to build a championship type of program. You can bring in those guys for a couple of years, and as long as you're producing and keeping the program rolling along, you're going to be okay. The issue, I think, is how much is NIL going to get behind basketball compared to football? Because that's where you're going to make up the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, he's got no choice. He has to use the transfer portal. So until he's, again, more on solid footing back in Southern California, getting out to the high schools, making his presence known, you got to make lemonade out of lemons right now. And look, it is interesting to me that none of the guys that were on the roster, I think save for one, Harrison Hornery, stuck around. Not even Trent Perry, who was one of the top recruits in Andy Enfield's 2024 class. Yeah, the class that just signed.
Right.
I mean, that young man is going over to UCLA, non-scholarship, one of the top players in the country.
Yeah.
But he's doing it on NIL. So that's to my point where that's how you can build a pretty successful program if you've got the money right now. Because basketball, if you've got good players, how long are they hanging around? 1 year, 2 years?
Yeah, that's definitely the environment we're in. I'm also curious. I don't think we touched on this earlier. They just recently, within the last week or so, I think it was, announced the teams, not the full schedule in terms of the specific dates, but the teams that everybody's going to be playing in conference in the Big Ten this year. And we had kind of been surmising, and it turned out to be the case, that Michigan State, and I think this is true for everybody from the traditional footprint of the conference, goes west to play 2 schools and then has the other 2 schools from the west coming in to play at our place. So in our case, we're coming to USC and UCLA, and we're hosting Washington and Oregon. Not that big a deal. It strikes me that it's a much, much bigger deal in terms of the travel logistics for the Western schools. Do you have any impression of that? I think it's a bigger deal in basketball too, just because there are many more games. Football, it's a factor, but I don't think it's as much as it's going to be in basketball.
Yeah, look, in the past, the Big Ten, their conference games are usually Sundays and Tuesdays. How did you guys do that?
It's
Sunday through. It's every day now because of networks.
Even
and
Friday
stuff.
night games now. It's gotten ridiculous. The traditional used to be back in the Stone Age. Used to be Thursdays and Saturdays, but we're long past that. Once ESPN introduced Big Monday, that all went out the window, and it's as Eric says, it's basically every day of the week now.
Right, and the Pac-12 tried to hold on to that traditional Thursday, Saturday, Friday, Sunday type of of situation. So I'm kind of used to that. So where you would have, USC and UCLA traveling up to the Northwest to play the Washington schools one weekend.
Right.
And then later on in the year, those Washington schools travel to LA, the LA schools the same weekend. What I would like to see happen from a travel perspective is, let's say USC's playing Michigan State in football one weekend in East Lansing. Well, let's have the basketball teams playing in East Lansing that Saturday night, Sunday, Friday, day before, day after, whatever. Kind of make it, all right, this is kind of cool. We can make this work. Just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see.
Right.
But yeah, to your point, it's going to be, for football, it's easy. You play 1 game a week. Basketball, you're playing 2 games a week. So for me, I think that's the easy solution. Tie a lot of those conference games in to the football season, as many as you can.
I just think
it's a conference in earlier or later. However you get it done, you get it done.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I haven't heard that idea before. That might be something that they could do. Definitely the tail end of the season, you might have 1 or 2 opportunities. Tail end of the football season, that is.
Right.
Yeah.
Basketball season, what, end of October?
Nope. No, November. But you'd have to
November. But there's been big outrage in Big Ten circles because just over the last couple of years, they've started moving a couple of conference games in early December, and everybody was outraged about that because traditionally it starts in January. Yeah. So who knows? I mean, I guess everything's on the table at this stage. I guess to me, if I were one of the Western schools, I would just be concerned about just the impact of all that travel on my team, given the frequency with which you're going to be taking those 4-hour, 5-hour flights. It seems like the burden is disproportionately on the Western schools as opposed to the people in our part of the country, because we're only going out there once. You guys are coming east more than that.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. There's been some talk about, maybe the West Coast schools staying out there for a week and, doing courses via Zoom and maybe even using libraries at certain campuses and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this dynamic really plays out.
Yeah, the thing that's hard to for us to appreciate in the Midwest is how far you're traveling anyway, even when you're within conference. Like you said, you'd go up to Washington. That's, I mean, it's over 1,000 miles to get up to Washington,
Yeah.
right? So that's a long flight in of itself.
Like I
You
said,
always-
I get the perspective where you guys are coming from, but for USC fans, this is really nothing new. When
Yeah.
like I said, they're going up to play the Washington schools, they're flying up there,
yeah.
they're staying up all the way Thursday through the end of game day, Saturday or Sunday, whenever, however the weekend is set up.
Yeah. Well, and as crazy it is for USC to join the Big Ten, I think it's even crazier that Stanford and Cal have joined the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
I mean, they're desperate, right? You got to do something versus being the Pac-2, like Oregon State and Washington State.
maybe I'm just looking out into the future, but I think we're just at the infantile stage right now of what we're going through. Eventually, there's not going to be any more conferences. It's going to be schools are here, schools are there, and the TV. It's going to be so much like the NFL type of scheduling, where the TV networks are just saying, "Guess who you're playing."
Yep. Yeah, I tend to think you're right for a lot of reasons. I think we're moving in that direction, and it's almost all football driven. I guess on that front, though, as a USC person, do you have any nostalgia or early nostalgia, let's say, or regret or empathy for those schools that have been left behind, the Cals, the Stanfords, especially Oregon State and Washington State?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, I'm a traditionalist at heart. I love rivalries. To me, that's a USC and not being able to play Cal and Stanford every year. That's a loss.
Yeah.
From that college atmosphere. I mean, USC and Cal, they've been playing each other longer than USC's been playing Notre Dame. That's their oldest rival. And that's off the table for a while now. So every year you have the weekender where USC fans would travel up to the Bay Area. Now, more for football, but you're losing that type of thing. And as far as the Oregon States, the Washington States of the world, without a doubt, I mean, it's horrible that they're being left behind. Those are two original members
Right.
of whatever the Pac-12 was when it was born. And ironically, they're the last two standing without really a home to sleep in.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who can't see this on video, if you're listening, that there's a honk if UCLA sucks sign behind Mark there. So clearly you managed to maintain your rival, which just reminds me too, of course, talking about seeing clearly, or make sure you have the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids come out. They can clean your windows. They do fantastic work. They've cleaned my house, and they can do your house cleaning as well. I know there's nothing dusty or dirty out in Southern California. Everything's just perfect out there. So
That's a topic for another show.
Yes, right, exactly. So anyway, if you want to get your windows cleaned, you get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find all that in the support page at the finalfoursontheschedule.com/support. So, I guess when it comes to USC and joining the Big Ten, and we talked about this with Travis Reed from UCLA, but what is your impression of basketball in the Big Ten as far as like, how will the style of USC and other Pac-12 teams fit in with the Big Ten?
I think styles aren't that different anymore. In the past, I think the Big Ten was considered more of the finger quotes physical conference.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Pac-12 being more finesse. I don't think that really exists anymore. Now, that being said, you still have coaches that like to coach a particular style. Tom Izzo, I think, still holds on to that old traditional style.
Yeah.
At least that's what I remember. But as far as being able to make that transition, I don't think it's going to be an issue. It's all about the players play the game now. You just want to make sure you have the best talent available and be able to teach them that defense matters and that, the coach is still in charge. And if you're not listening to what the coach says, there's a seat right over here next to him. And I don't know that I think is the biggest difference in today's game is being able to have players, regardless of the conference, that are willing that appreciate discipline, that appreciate playing defense, that aren't in it for offense first. I know I'm kind of sidetracking it here, but when I watch basketball, I've become, and I'm an ex-high school basketball coach. I've actually become a little disillusioned watching the game. Everything is a 3-point shot or somebody trying to get to the free throw line. I don't see a whole lot of team basketball anymore. And I remember a lot of that from the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I still see that as much.
Yeah, no, I think we see that too. We've seen that evolution of the game. I mean, with Michigan State, it's been pretty much the same every year. There are certain things that strengths and weaknesses that change, whether it's rebounding, it's been pretty poor for the last couple of years for Michigan State, but there is a, it's not just like a Nate Oates where it's a 3 or a layup, and I feel like you watch women's basketball and that's all there is. It's just a 3-point shot and layup and there's nothing else. There's really no mid-range game at all. And the defense thing, there are a couple of teams in the Big Ten that are really poor. We talk about this quite a bit. And I don't know if you have any sort of feel for this, but when it comes to scouting and the coaching in the Big Ten, it's really hard to have big advantages. And the way you can play is so different when you're playing outside the conference because the scouting is so good in the Big Ten that I don't know if there's just more resources. Is it like that in the Pac-12 too? I mean, do you feel like there's a lot of scouting? I mean, you're an ex-coach, so you probably can pick up on those things probably better than others.
So I don't know if there's any type of scouting similar to what Michigan was doing with their football program, but yeah, look, there's a lot of familiarity. Let's be honest. Everybody knows everybody. They're all playing in the same AAU, grassroots.
Sure. Yeah.
So because of that, I don't think there's any coach that's saying, you know what, I got something on my X's and O's that you've never seen before. It doesn't work that way, at least from my perspective. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
it's a hard one to answer. And honestly, we feel that every time we leave the conference, like it's the NCAA tournament, the ability to run Michigan State is a team that likes to run. People never think of that when they think of Big Ten, but definitely there's a lot of emphasis on running and getting out, the blitz runs, scoring 5 seconds from out of bounds, after a made basket. And you just can't do that in the Big Ten. I mean, everyone's just sort of set up to prevent that from happening, or they don't recognize the speed with which Michigan State can do that until you face it a couple times in your career. You're like, okay, we need to make sure we're back. And that's why it opens up a little bit more for us in the big NCAA tournament. And then even in the the pre-conference play, but I don't know. That's a change we see.
As far as I'm concerned, in college basketball, if you have a dominant point guard, you have the opportunity to do really, really well during your season and well into the tournament.
Yeah.
You combine that with a team that likes to play defense and likes to rebound, again, you're increasing your chances. And again, when you have good coaching behind that can instill, a system that works great. I always wondered what Pete Carril could do at Princeton if he had scholarship level players.
Yeah, right.
Because it's that type of coaching. I mean, when you run a motion offense and you run it the right way, I don't care how well you run the defense, you can't catch up to the ball. And eventually you're going to get beat with a backdoor pass for a layup. So I know a lot of people say that's boring basketball, but it's beautiful basketball. And imagine doing that with these elite athletes.
Yeah. Well, I've always wanted the same thing, like the triple option. If you're running that at Ohio State, I mean, how much different is that with an elite offensive line? And you've got 3 or 4 or 5-star running backs. I guess, you're not passing much. And so you're not going to get a very good quarterbacks maybe. But you certainly would have more in your playbook if you can do things like that. I don't know, but those are things I guess we'll never know.
Right. Well, look, I go back to this past season with USC and Andy Enfield. I think he had everything set up. He finally had a point guard in Isaiah Collier, who also happened to be the #1 high school recruit in the country. You had Boogie Ellis returning, who is instant offense.
Mm-hmm.
You had the young man from Washington State, DJ Rodman, coming down, who added some veteran experience. You had the big players inside. He had everything set up. And for whatever reason, it didn't work. And it's because they got away from playing defense. People don't recognize this, but Andy Enfield, his teams are known for playing defense first. Last year, it disappeared. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I look at, what USC brought in, and I just think there was a disconnect in the locker room because of, wow, there's a lot of, Bronny James, another aspect of it.
Right.
Too much NIL, too much pulling in different directions. And I don't think the coaching staff was ready to deal with that last year.
Yeah.
First time
Well,
having talent all in one place and that much pressure.
yeah. Well, we talk about that in the sense that there is it's important to maintain a culture at your program, whether you're a coach. And it's not as easy to maintain as people make it seem that, you just bring a bunch of guys in. As long as it's the same coach, they're going to, play the same way. Just not the case. And so, Tom Izzo has been very intentional about not really using the portal a whole lot, to the consternation of a lot of fans, a lot of fan base, we should be getting this and that person in and out of the portal, but it comes at a cost. And you watch other teams, and there's some that can manage just to adapt. Like I think Brad Underwood at Illinois has been an example that he's sort of had the portal teams, that he's had two different teams, two different styles of play. He's made it work, but that's really hard to do, and to maintain a culture, like you said, where suddenly you bring a bunch of players in, and on paper it looks like they should be great, but they just don't. You don't know they're going to gel, and it's there's a big gamble in doing that every year. That you may there may be less consistency and more cycling up and down for teams.
I mean, look at the year that USC was having their run in the tournament when they walloped Kansas. Those were teams that Andy Enfield recruited. It wasn't a transfer-laden team. Yeah. And I think the more he got away from his recruits, it kind of got away from him.
Yeah.
And that's why I go back to the transfer portal players. Yeah, they're coming. They want to build something, but they're looking down the road to the future, and they're looking at themselves. And that's why basketball is so different than football. It's more individualistic than a team sport than people realize. And it takes a really strong coach to have people buy in and say, you know what, I'm going to subjugate my game for the team first. And that's why Spartan fans should understand why Tom Izzo has been so successful, why Mike Krzyzewski was so successful, why Bobby Knight was so successful. Maybe not in the end, but again, it takes a firm hand.
For sure. Yeah. And you can definitely see that when you have, when players move around, there's just not as much, there's just a lot of risk, and it doesn't take much to change things. And I think the thing you always have to remind yourself is only half the teams are above 500 and half are below. Right. And so just because you're getting a bunch of transfer players, I mean, everybody's getting transfer players. It doesn't mean that you're making your team better. There's something to be said. There's for stability. Of course, there are certainly costs. If you're stable, but you've got a bunch of guys who aren't any good, then you're not, that's the classic line, right? Like the good news is everyone's back. The bad news is everyone's back. Right. So
well, Keith Jackson, I maybe you remember Keith Jackson, ABC Sportscaster.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
He said, and it wasn't actually he who said it first. I want to say it was Al McGuire, the old basketball coach from Marquette. The best thing about a freshman, the next year, they're sophomores.
Yeah, now they're not even on your team. That's the problem, right? You don't, or at least you don't know.
Even worse now.
Yeah, right. You spend all those resources recruiting people, and they may not be on your team. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Mark. I just want to quick shout out to our other sponsors you didn't have a chance to get to, the Christian Brothers Automotive in West Michigan. There are 4 different locations. You can get a oil change and courtesy servicing, and also tire rotation for $59.99, which is a $40 savings if you just mentioned hoops. And also for Nudge Printing, which provides all our printing stuff. You can go to nudgeprinting.com for the huge selection of Michigan State and other colleges. Nothing out in California at this point. A couple other small schools like Texas State. They actually even have Indiana Hoosiers. If my son is now going to Purdue, so he is going to be, I don't know, he's going to maybe have a problem with Nudge Printing now. I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to Gabe about that. But so you can head on over to Nudge Printing, at nudgeprinting.com, 20% off. You mentioned Final Four at the coupon code. So you can find all our sponsors at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support, or if you're lazy, tffinots.com/support, which is, I suppose, slightly shorter, but maybe harder to remember. So anyway, until next time, the Final Fours on the schedule. Go green.